Good morning and most welcome to lecture 1418 of the Heidegger series. Today I will start reading from the book by Stephen M. Rosen, The Self-Evolving Cosmos. And we have used excerpts from the book earlier on. One instance was the Morrison-Morley experiment of 1887. And Rosen used very good, how can you say, metaphors for what it is that they discovered, the incredible explosion in knowledge. I will go to chapter 5, page 90, and my first take on it is from stillness to movement. How can a still figure, for instance the Möbius strip or the Klein bottle, also be movement? And it's not the Klein bottle or the Möbius strip moving, it is inherent in the topology. Do be warned, the chapter is rather hard to grasp. And this is also in lieu of understanding Rosen. Monday we will have a talk to him and we will record it for your benefit. So, to get more into the subject. Chapter 5, the dimensional family of topological spinors. Generalization of intuitive topology. By way of advancing toward an approach that can encompass all the forces of nature, let us consider an intuitive generalization of the topological account given in the previous chapters. Mathematicians have investigated the transformations that result from bisecting topological surfaces. To begin, we compare the bisection of the one-sided Möbius strip with that of its two-sided counterpart, the cylindrical ring. Suppose we were to cut the cylindrical ring down the middle, proceeding along its full length. Upon completing the cut, the ring would simply decompose into a pair of identical narrower rings, each possessing the same topological structure as the original. A more interesting result is obtained in bisecting the one-sided Möbius strip. Rather than falling into two separate pieces, as one might expect, the cut surface retains its integrity, but has now become the two-sided structure. Compare a single side of the bisected Möbius strip with that of the two-sided cylindrical ring. Whereas revolution about the latter describes but one closed loop, traversal of the former gives us a doubly looped figure 8 pattern known in mathematics as a lemniscate. Turned on its side, the lemniscatory surface resembles the familiar sign for infinity. Now the integrative quality of the Möbius surface lies in its paradoxical one-sidedness. The two sides of the Möbius flow unbrokenly into each other to form a single side, without either side actually losing its distinctness. I might comment there, that is a really weird feature. When the bisection of the Möbius strip transforms it into a two-sided structure, this integrity is lost. Yet we can now see that each of those sides, being lemniscatory in character, constitutes its own order of paradoxical unity in diversity. That is, in a single side, we have a double cycle, these cycles being connected by a continuous movement through the central node of the figure 8. So here Rosen introduces movement. It is true that in the lemniscate we no longer have a complete overlapping of opposing elements as we do in the Möbius strip. The lemniscate thus could be said to have less internal coherence than the Möbius. Be that as it may, a similar pattern of transpolar flow is evident in both structures. Note that, whereas bisecting the simple symmetric cylindrical ring yields rings that are completely symmetric with respect to each other, bisecting the asymmetric Möbius strip produces lemniscatory sides that are related enantiomorphically. They complement each other in the manner of asymmetric mirror opposites. And just as the single lemniscatory side has its mirror counterpart on the other side of the bisected Möbius, the Möbius as a whole has its own enantiomorph. For while there exists but one form of the cylindrical ring, the Möbius surface can be produced in either a left or right-handed version. If both versions of the Möbius were constructed, then glued together, superimposed on one another point for point, the result would be a Klein bottle. The Klein bottle, Möbius strip, and lemniscate constitute a series of topological forms that are nested within one another. Bisecting the Klein bottle produces Möbius enantiomorphs. Bisecting the Möbius yields mirror-opposed lemniscatory sides. One more bisection is required to complete the series. Upon cutting the lemniscate, the surface neither retains its integrity nor simply falls into separate pieces. Instead, the single surface is transformed into two interlocking surfaces, each of which is itself lemniscatory. The transformation brought about by this bisection is clearly the last one of any significance, since additional bisections being bisections of lemniscates can only produce the same results, interlocking lemniscates. bisection series is completed then when we obtain interlocking lemniscates, a structure we shall henceforth refer to as the sublemniscate. Now, to reiterate a key principle, conventional mathematics is guided by the classical intuition of object in space before subject. Accordingly, on the conventional view, all members of the bisection series are taken as two-dimensional topological objects embedded in a higher dimensional continuum that is set up for the abstract operations of the detached mathematical analyst. What the phenomenological thinking has told us is that the Klein bottle is no such object. Instead, it is the circulatory action that fuses object and analyst, and in the process brings hitherto idealized three-dimensional space to its true dialectical realization. So my comment here, you see here that the Klein bottle is phenomenological, not an object without an observer. It doesn't exist without an observer. The observer is an integral part of the Klein bottle. I continue. The necessary whole in the Klein bottle plays a critical role in this. We found in the last chapter that the bottle cannot be completed as an object in three-dimensional space without being ruptured. In phenomenologically exploring the added dimension required to fill this whole, we are able to confirm the idea that the Klein bottle, in its intimate blending of object, subject, and space, is an embodiment of the depth dimension, the three-dimensional life world. In considering the subclinian members of the bisection series, it is clear that they can be completed properly as objects in conventional three-dimensional space. It is for this reason that, while a paradoxical structure like the Möbius strip can well symbolize the integration of the three-dimensional subject and its object, it cannot effectively embody sad integration. The proposition I now offer is that although the subclinian members of our topological cyclonic spin family indeed cannot embody the dialectic of the three-dimensional life world, they provide embodiments of lower dimensional orders of depth. Whereas the standard interpretation of the bisection series says that each of its members is a two-dimensional object embedded in a higher dimensional continuum. What I am proposing is that in-depth dimensional terms, none of its members actually possess this status. Since the necessary incompleteness of the Klein bottle in three-dimensional space is plain to us, it is relatively easy for us to see how this structure defies classical objectification. Why can we not see necessary holes in the subcleinian members of this series? It is because our seeing is three-dimensional. Within this frame of observation, lower dimensional dialectics are imperceptible. To understand the role of the subclining structures vis-à-vis the lower dimensions, let us examine the exact manner in which lower dimensional dialecticity is repressed within the three-dimensional framework. In the foregoing chapter, we considered Merleau-Ponty's account of the dialectical opposition entailed in the perspectival interplay of the visible and invisible. Wherein surfaces in space overlap and eclipse one another, all the surfaces of an object cannot be seen in a single glance. But while the bounding planes that enclose a volume of three-dimensional space are not all simultaneously perceptible, the endpoints bounding the line segment and the lines enclosing a surface area can all be perceived at once. The simultaneous perceptibility of the points and lines render these geometric beings purely and simply positive, as Merleau-Ponty said of Cartesian space in general. Though we may speak of them as being opposed, their appearance together before us as just what they are lacks dialectical tension. Therefore, while planes give evidence of the invisible, and while in so doing they implicate our subjectivity, points and lines apparently do conform to the Cartesian idea of dimensionality. They appear as but the in itself, as sheer positivity. And positivity, my comment, is visible or noticeable. And what we see here, I would say, is the eternal movement between what is covered and what is uncovered. Thea and aletheia, to use Heideggerian terms. Incapable of expressing true oppositions, point and lines in their simultaneous perceptibility seem to give us only juxtaposition. It is true that standard mathematical analysis treats all dimensions, planes included, as merely juxtapositional continua. Phenomenological investigation tells us that such treatment is not appropriate when it comes to the interplay of planes in space. But are we not seeing now that the classical analysis is indeed warranted in the case of points and lines? I propose that conventional analysis does not suffice when we are inquiring into the deeper nature of lines and points. I suggest that while lines and points appear to be merely juxtapositional in the three-dimensional framework of observation, in actuality, they possess their own dialectical attributes. It is in the repressed dialectics of points and lines that we find the lower dimensional life worlds that I have intimated. To grasp the meaning of lower dimensional dialecticity, let us begin by clarifying the classical distinction between three-dimensional space and the elements that bound it. Space is bounded by two-dimensional planes. Manifested in concrete form, the bounding plane serves to partition space into particular regions and neighborhoods. It is in its capacity as a concrete bounding element that the plane possesses opposing sides. The region of space on one side of the plane is set apart from that on the other. In the case of three-dimensional space itself, we cannot speak meaningfully of opposite sides, since space does not function as a bounding element. Through its bounding elements, space plays the role that Plato attributed to it in the Timaeus. It is a receptacle. I think we could put a pause there. Time for the whiteboard. Okay, I will show 2 Möbius strips I made. And here it is easier to see how we go from sort of forms of space, developments in space, to the Lemminskate. And the Lemminskate is, of course, also the eternity symbol, lying down 8. And it has, very important, and that was the first part of my read, it has a movement going this way, underneath, over that way, above. So it's an inherent movement in space itself. The second thing is that A and B, the line, is 100% visible. Nothing is covered. There is no aletheia, no thea. Everything is in the open. The square, everything is in the open. It is out there. It is under the luminescent light of Cartesian space. You can see it. And now we will go over to the other side. Now we enter the 3 dimensions, and as you can perceive, the whole is no longer visible. The beyond is behind. It is covered. And this is an incredibly important distinction that Rosen is doing. The coveredness, it's ignored in the Cartesian viewpoint of space. There is no coveredness here. And this lack of covering is in thinking brought over here. But Rosen shows this is not true to the fact. There is no viewpoint where you can see the whole. To make this extra clear, I will show you what you cannot see. This is the covered, invisible, and it's invisible from every perspective you choose to take. This is truer to dimensionality, whereas the Cartesian viewpoint is not. It doesn't allow for movement. It doesn't have this inherent coveredness. Cartesian space is what we usually think applies also to this and to the Lemniscate. And therefore we need to add, like making a supplement of movement. It is no longer inherent in nature. And this is the reason why the timeline got evolved in Newton, because in the staticness of the Cartesian space there is no movement possible, no inherent movement. We will now make a Möbius strip. We put my dear colleague Kalle on the spot, but do remind Kalle here that it is a difficult thing to do. It is not an easy thing, so be patient. And you should turn that way so we can teach also the ones looking at the thing. And I would guide Kalle here if it goes wrong.
So first up, like this.
Half a twist.
Alpha twist. And then this goes
and do the overlap.
Remember like this.
Let's see here. The last thing is that the two surfaces needs to be on top of each other, like this.
So white on white.
Yeah, I could say that, depending on if you have writing on the paper. And now, Kalle, you made the first leg of the Lemniscate. And thank you for correcting me. I forgot an N here. And this one, because of its one-sidedness, has in itself movement. Whereas if you start out with this, as we do, in common parlance, this is the default mode, the Cartesian space. The Lemniscate and this wondrous thing, the Möbius strip, will be static. They will be still.
Yes, it's almost vibrating.
Yeah, it is. And of course, the Lemniscate and the Möbius strip partake in the current physics of quantum mechanics. There are excellent ways of understanding the difference. This is a just magical tool for didactics. And I said in the beginning it's going to be rather difficult, but hopefully some other odd ends cleared out here. I know it's difficult, Kalle. Do you want to add a comment or just a personal view? Or do you want to wait?
No, I could only mention the etymology lemniscos. It comes from wool ribbon in Greek. It's a ribbon, so you can think it fits with the white surface wool by chance. Of course, you can use a black one.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Of course, but I think it's ribbon, so it fits with. It's also it means also bandage. So as whiteness.
It's not far from then.
No. As I say, interesting idea. Of course.
We continue with the second leg, and I think some more clearance would come. But to be patient, this is not the easiest thing, although it has a great didactic value. So we will continue where I left off in the summary. The movement is slowly becoming progressive, and I do recommend that you meditate over this last cube, and you will also in here recognize the Necker cube. But do remember Even in the case of the Necker cube, some parts will be inevitably hidden from view. That hiddenness is the same as the covering in Heidegger. So you see here, this is a way of understanding Heidegger's main point. Through its bounding elements, space plays the role that Plato attributed to it in the Timaeus. It is a receptacle, a medium or containing environment. For to contain an object in space, one must establish a boundary that sets off its interior region from what lies outside of it. Note that while mathematicians often abstractly refer to the two-dimensional plane as space, in ordinary concrete experience, it is only the three-dimensional domain that serves in this capacity. And this is crucial to remember. So space is never area. It's not abstract. It is true to the quality of space. What of the line and the point in this milieu? They may be regarded as subsidiary bounding elements. The line partitions the planar bounding element divides it into two-dimensional areas. And the point partitions the linear bounding element cuts it into one-dimensional lengths. With this as a background, we may now consider the possibility of a lower dimensional receptacle. That is, a lower dimensionality that would actually function concretely as a space in its own right. Not just as a bounding element for three-dimensional space, another pertinent point made. Beginning with Edwin Abbott's imaginative excursion into Flatland, there have been many conjectures on what experience might be like for a lower dimensional being. However, in much of this, the dialectical character of dimensionality is missed, and this has resulted in some inconsistencies. Take, for example, the speculations of the Russian theosophical philosopher P.D. Uspensky. Quote, "Let us consider the two-dimensional world and the being living on a plane. In what manner will a being living on such a plane universe cognize his world? First of all, we can affirm that he will not feel the plane upon which he lives. He will not do so because he will feel the objects. that is, the flat figures which are on this plane. He will feel the lines which limit them. The lines will differ from the plane in that they produce sensations. Therefore, they exist. The plane does not produce sensations, therefore it does not exist. End of sight. Thus, according to Ouspensky's extrapolation of classical space, just as we three-dimensional beings do not at all sense the space in which we are embedded, but only the two-dimensional surfaces of the objects in this space. The two-dimensional beings would be restricted to sensing the one-dimensional edges of the objects in their space. Ouspensky further notes, quote, sensing only lines, the plane being will not sense them as we do. First of all, he will see no angle. It is extremely easy for us to verify this by experiment. If we hold before our eyes two matches, inclined one to the other in a horizontal plane, then we shall see one line. To see the angle, we shall have to look from above. The two-dimensional being cannot look from above and therefore cannot see the angle. These conclusions about two-dimensional experience appear to be directly contradicted by Ouspensky later in his text. When he speaks of two-dimensional beings as capable of perceiving surfaces, not just lines, of experiencing simultaneously in two directions, of viewing circles, why the discrepancy? Why is it that in one place Ouspensky asserts that the perceptual capacity of a two-dimensional being is strictly one-dimensionally, whereas elsewhere he claims that it is two-dimensional? Perhaps Ouspensky's susceptibility to this error stems from the fact that while his approach to dimension is classical, the truth of perception may be found in the non-classical realm that lies between dimensions. My comment here, it could be helpful to think about fractality, which resides in between the normal dimensions, so to speak. End of my comment. Ouspensky's modus operandi is extrapolation by dimensional analogy. Thus, when he draws the conclusion that the two-dimensional being has no idea of an angle in the line it perceives, analogical reasoning evidently should tell him that we three-dimensional beings would be just as unable to perceive an angle in the surface it is clear that we are incapable of seeing a solid cube or sphere simultaneously from all sides. Uspensky makes the claim that we can never see, even in the minute, any part of the outer world as it is. That is, as we know it. We can never see the desk or the wardrobe all at once, from all sides and inside. You can here think about the beetle in the box by Wittgenstein. The inside will not be accessible to you. Evident in these two sentences is Uspensky's presupposition of a peremptory division between three and two-dimensional sense perception. One that leads to the conclusion that if we cannot see all sides of a solid object at once, then we are limited to viewing but a single side of it. According to Uspensky, while we do know of the existence of the other sides of any solid object we encounter, this knowledge is not directly sensed. It derives from conceptual inferences we draw about the object. It is true that our sense experience permits us to apprehend but a single surface of a solid at a time. That we cannot simultaneously sense a surface that is perpendicular to it. That we have no sense of the angle joining two or more surfaces of the solid. Obviously, it is not. The phenomenological fact of three-dimensional perception is that it is partial. Although we surely cannot view all 6 outer surfaces of a solid cube in a simple simultaneity, we can see up to 3 of them in this way. So once more, Rosen is making a point of that we can actually perceive all sides. And that is space perception. Thus, we can view angles joining surfaces, though, to be sure, we cannot apprehend them as completely as we can the angles that connect the lines of a plane figure. These are the facts of the perspective that Ouspensky glosses over in his classical approach to dimension. We cannot imagine the cube seen not in perspective but simultaneously from all sides, says Ouspensky. In failing to qualify this further, Ouspensky allows the inaccurate impression that perspectival experience entails a single-sided view of the cube. One that would preclude the sensation of angle. In Ouspensky's construal of dimension, the dialectical character of lived experience is neglected. At polar extremes, where we would experience either all sides of the cube in simple simultaneity or just a single side, but nothing in between. Dialectical tension is absent. The vitality of the dialectic is found only by taking into account the intermediary zone, where there is opposition, not just simple juxtaposition. The sine qua non of perspectival three-dimensional life world is the opposition of the sides of the surfaces. And it should follow by analogy that in a two-dimensional life space there would be a dialectic of opposing edges of lines. This is the lower dimensional action that is occluded in three-dimensional space, where the edges of lines appear to be merely juxtapositional. Note that a lower order of subjectivity should be implicit in this action, since dialectical action is not merely objective, but entails the interplay of object and subject. Thus, just as the dialectic of the plane in the three-dimensional life world gives evidence of Merleau-Ponty's invisible, and in so doing implicates our subjectivity. The dialectic of the line in the two-dimensional life world should entail a subjectivity of its own. My comment here, subjectivity is inborn in dimensionality. That is the hole in the Klein bottle. If the Klein bottle embodies the dialectic of the three-dimensional life world, and if there is in fact a second life world, one of different dimensionality than the first, then I'm proposing that this second dimensional order is embodied by the lower dimensional counterpart of the Klein bottle. The structure that results from bisecting the Klein bottle, namely the Möbius structure. It is true that in three-dimensional sorry, a bit too warm in here. Too many lights. It is true that in three-dimensional space, the Möbius appears as a well-formed topological object, a strip or surface that can readily be completed without the necessity of self-intersection. But remember what Rooker said about flatlanders attempting to assemble a Möbius strip in a two-dimensional space. They would in fact be forced to cut a hole in it. Just as we three-dimensional beings must do with the Klein bottle. So it seems that in two-dimensional space, the Möbius structure indeed would have the special self-intersective hole necessary for playing out the dialectic at that level. Sad dialectic clearly would not involve the interplay of opposing sides of a surface, since there could be no such opposition in two space. But note that while a Möbius strip embedded in three-dimensional space does take the form of a one-sided surface, it has also the property of being one-edged. Unlike the closed surfaces of the torus and Klein bottle, the cylindrical ring and the Möbius strip possesses edges. It is not only the opposing sides of the Möbius that flow into each other, but also its edges. To confirm this, run your index finger continuously along an edge of the Möbius until the whole length of the surface has been traversed. Upon returning to your point of departure, you will discover that you have covered both edges of the surface. In contrast, tracing an edge of the cylindrical ring maintains the simple distinction between the edges. Of course, in three-dimensional space, the opposition of edges lacks the dialectical force of opposing sides. Though we may describe the boundary lines constituting the edges of the Möbius as opposed to one another at any local cross-section of the strip, the fact that we can view them simultaneously places them in the same simply positive context. Thus renders their relationship merely juxtapositional, not truly oppositional. And there is no genuine perspectival opposition. The Möbius integration of edges must lack full-fledged trans-perspectival dialecticity. But this would not be the case for the Möbius structure of flatland. In this two-dimensional space, the fusion of edges would possess the same dialectical character as the Kleinian fusion of perspectives in three-dimensional space. In two-dimensional space, the Möbius structure would not be an open surface, but a line, one that is paradoxically both opened and closed, just as the Klein bottle is an open and closed surface. We are aware, however, that This Kleinian surface is no simple two-dimensional object in three-dimensional space. But is a structure that brings three-dimensionality to its dialectical completion. By the same token, the Möbius line would bring two-dimensionality to its wholeness. My comment here is spelled with both W and only H, because the wholeness is a dialectical movement. So there is a movement in the opposing sides. In the Cartesian viewpoint, there is only juxtaposition. Things are placed side by side. There is no dialectics. There are no oppositions in the true sense. This is comparable to the Derridian concept of supplément, an additive extra. And it lacks the true energy of real space. Derrida goes into a book to expose its juxtapositions and to reveal the true dialectics that are underneath, so they can do their force. That brings life to the text. That is the movement of the Lemming's gate. We have mentioned this before when we looked at the wave and how the Cartesian understanding of complete juxtapositioned understanding, a clarity as is often called, would stop the movement and here have a single static take on the wave. You can call it a particle or a monosemic take on the text, thereby devaluing the text, making it less, because the energy can only come from the opposition between what is in view, the uncovered thing, and what is covered. The Möbius strip elegantly gives a, I would say, tremendously relevant and usable key, although this at a first take sounds frightfully complicated. There is an inherent pedagogical twist here. So space is what is abundant in text, in thinking, and it's revitalized if we are able to see that there's constantly is a vital opposition. Opposing forces makes presencing come about. It's not a standstill, although there are particles, but they are vivid, they are alive. You can put a pause there, I'm going to draw some more things. So the point in mentioning the philosopher Ouspensky is to show when he goes into discussing understanding the Flatlander novel, he brings in the understanding of the Cartesian, so to speak, one-sidedness, where everything needs to be in the open to be perceived. And the wholeness to enter needs an opening, a whole. And that whole is, as we mentioned, I think 100 lectures ago, the subjectivity or the interpenetration, a feature of space itself. This can be a bit clearly shown with the cylinder that lacks this twist. So if I go on the edge of the cylinder, I will come back to the same place and there will be no subjectivity. This does not happen with a Möbius strip because it has a subjective whole in its Cartesian dimensionality. It is close, this comparison. Here everything is juxtapositioned side by side, whereas here the two sides are opposing each other, as you can see, caused by the twist. And when it's twisted, all the magic appears. Ouspensky was not able to reach into this perspectival thinking. One could say for Ouspensky, perspectives were something within perception. But that isn't true at juxtaposition, and you come to the standstill. The hare will never catch up with the tortoise, or the world will have to be understood in static atoms. Viewing from different perspectives is made possible by a slow acceptance what space really is about. And one famed example that has entered the lectures many times is the poor cat of Schrödinger. we could say from one perspective, in this more encompassing, not the common Uspensky way, but in the more encompassing, one could say, by a twist of the Möbius strip, it's alive, while at the other side, it's dead. It is this opposition that makes it possible for it to move about. Staticness and movement are important oppositions. Compared to the Newtonian stillness, fixatedness of the free perpendicular planes. In this, movement has to be static and has to be juxtapositioned, an extra called T. Here there is no movement and there is no opposition. This opposing force is also apparent in the dialectics of the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, as so today so frequently expounded by McGilchrist. They need to be in dialectical opposition, to be different and being able to show up wholeness, a unitary individual wholeness that is not endangered by the opposing forces, but vitalized and essential. We have also earlier talked about imaginary photons and electrons when we 10 lectures ago passed through Alan Emrean's writings and looked at them. There it became obvious that non-existence is a participatory opposition to existence. In the Cartesian viewpoint, imaginary particles needs to be left out of the picture. The viewpoint of the line or area. And I think the area is especially pertinent because it's often confused in naming with space. Maybe a little commentary, Kalle. Sorry for my voice. There you go.
This spelling, wholeness, inspires me. And he used it on page 99 in this book, Self-Revolving Cosmos. And I'm actually using this something inspired from this spelling in one of the assignments I do. I'm now reading a university course called Apocryphal Gospels, and I'm doing an assignment about the Gospel of Judas from 2nd century. I think it's good here to do something completely separate, but still related to Judas is a good idea, I think, to compare with Möbius band. Is he bad guy, the traitor, or is he good guy? So it's a good illustration, Möbius band. Everything can be turned around completely, like in the Gospel of Judas. The scholars today, they don't know if Judas is a good guy or bad guy. That scholars are divided. I find that interesting. While in canonical Gospels is only the bad guy. There is no, but in the apocryphal Gospels from the second century. So and I would like to say something that illustrates this idea. So Jesus says to Judas, "You 13th daimon, why do you try so hard?" And so scholars discuss this. Does it mean demon, like in English demon? That is, demon is a very negative word in English, no doubt. Or should you write instead, you can transcribe it in two manners in English, demon or daimon. Excuse me, di. So, because if you translate it as a demon, it has very negative. So then you would really say Judas is a very negative person, demon. But if you choose the transcription of like this transcription, then it's neutral, because in Plato it's something good. It's a demon, it's something that we all have inside us, like consciousness. So what do you choose? So does Jesus say that Judas is a demon or a daimon? My solution is to go something between, and I would take this. I would say you choose this. That is something inspired from this wholeness. So you have both ways. So it's up to the reader to decide if I want to see Judas in this gospel as a bad guy. Okay, then you choose demon. You ignore the A within parentheses. And so you have both ways. It's a lesson from Möbius band to take into the full to complete the lesson from Möbius band is to add the lesson from Rosen's wholeness, demon. You have both ways, both good guy and bad guy. The Platon's daimon, or demon from Christian Orthodox Christianity, where demon is only something bad. So when Jesus says, he says like that. Let me repeat now. So Jesus says to Judas, "You 13th daimon," that is daimon or demon. Why do you try so hard? That was my point of view. Say something quick, Hans, please, before the video ends.
Yes, very good, Kalle. In the context also, without Judas's betraying Jesus, there wouldn't be a crucifixion and the salvation of humankind. You can see the timeline. It's ignored when we call Judas only bad, and it wouldn't serve us to call him only good. It is the Möbius strip, definitely, I would say. So it's a helpful approach Rosen is using here. At first, I warned you earlier, it is like hitting a wall, but once it opens up, it is incredibly helpful. Thank you very much for your patience, and have a very pleasant morning. Bye-bye.
Thank you.